There's been a recorded 765 serious accidents involving the use and operation of the telehandler, an average of 1.5 accidents per week for the past 10 years. Telehandlers are regarded as the Swiss Army knife of the construction site. One of the most versatile pieces of construction site equipment, they are a significant contribution to the efficient delivery of the construction process. Unfortunately, the very versatility that makes them so useful also provides scope for unsafe use. Two of the most significant hazards associated with the operation of telehandlers are lateral stability and visibility. On the 19th of September 2007, one such case of an accident involving the very use of a telehandler had occurred. Mr. Herring, aged 36, and Mr. French, aged 20, were men working for contractors Kia Western on the East End Community Enterprise Centre project, Plymouth. Mr. Herring's duties included that of operating a Manitou MT-1435SL telescopic handling machine, weighing 10 tons and a boom capable of extending up to 14 meters. Mr. French was a bricklayer. He laid bricks. Every morning, Mr. Herring and Mr. French would have their morning beverages and daily chit-chat before commencing with their daily workload. On this day, however, events would unfold a little different, as basic flaws in Mr. Herring's procedures would later prove fatal. Knowingly working with an elevated load above two fellow workers, the inevitable happened. The tipping skip fell off its forks and tragically landed on Mr. French, killing him instantly. The prosecuting counsel investigating the case would later conclude that Mr. Herring's actions were dangerous, reckless, and grossly negligent. The prosecution alleged that Mr. Herring had broken 5 golden rules when operating the assigned telehandler. He knowingly worked with an elevated load above fellow workers. He failed to use the Manitou stabilizing feet. He was moving forward with the boom fully extended. He failed to adjust the forks to fit them into securing sleeves on the skip, and he ignored audible and visual alarms found within his cab. Other problems identified include the operating standards of the construction site. During the trial, it had come to surface that due to the confined site conditions, employees were required to work around the lifting machine. The defense had also argued Mr. Herring had learning difficulties. It is evident that several health and safety regulations had been breached, leading to the accident. The first of which can be identified under the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. Section 7 makes it a legal requirement that every employee should take reasonable care to not only themselves but to others around them. Therefore, when Mr. Herring was knowingly operating the telehandler with the boom fully extended over his fellow workers, he was in clear breach of this regulation. Under the Construction, Design and Management Regulations 2007, both Regulation numbers 26 and 36 are in breach. Regulation 26 stipulates that a site must provide sufficient amounts of working space that does not pose risks to health. Regulation 36 further states construction sites should be organized so that pedestrians and vehicles can move safely without risks to health. When Mr. Herring was operating within the confined site area, an area of close proximity to his fellow workers, both mentioned regulations could be construed as being in breach. Later prosecuted by the Crown Prosecution Authority, Mr. Herring was sentenced to 21 months imprisonment on the basis of his actions falling so far below what one can expect of a careful and competent telehandler driver as to amount to a criminal act. Mr. Herring was found guilty of manslaughter on the grounds of gross negligence, with further prosecutions pending from the Health and Safety Executive. No charges were brought against employer Kia Western. The Safe Use of Telehandlers in Construction Guide, produced by the various organizations, including the HSE, has been devised to directly address the high number of accidents involving telehandlers. Section 4.4 makes specific reference to the fact that telehandlers should always be driven with the boom lowered, to ensure the machine's center of gravity remains as low as possible. Reflecting the case in question, Section 4.4 continues to highlight that driving with the boom raised should never be considered as normal practice. Section 7.4 shows the need for manufacturing instructions to be made easily available. These may be in the form of adhesive labels fitted to the telehandler's cab. One such example being that of a safe loading chart indicating the necessity of stabilizers, a measure that should have been taken to avoid the death of Mr. French. The Health and Safety Guidance Document 144 Section 5 states that the majority of construction transport accidents result from the inadequate segregation of pedestrians and vehicles. Satisfactory segregation can be achieved by prohibited pedestrian areas. Where this is not achievable, the use of signalers should be employed. Given that Mr. Herring was known to suffer learning difficulties, attention should be drawn to Section 49 of the Health and Safety Guidance Document 144, which highlights the need for employers to assess the competence of their drivers. Though Kia Western maintains that sufficient training was provided in line with the HSE L117, which covers training requirements for lift trucks. Section 3 of the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations 1999 makes it a necessity to carry out risk assessments for all operations on site, identifying the hazards, the personnel involved, the likelihood of any harm, and the severity of any identified. Such hazards identified within the case involving Mr. Herring include that of falling loads onto those below. The persons involved are those working below the area and the members of the public at ground level. The calculation of the risk without control measures resulting to a figure of 12 out of a possible 25. The control measures used to address these hazards include the explicit briefing given to the operators and the inspection of loads for loose objects. A further recalculation of risk is done, this time with control measures put in place, and a new figure of 3 is produced, showing the degree of success in risk management. Although not a legal requirement, the use of method statements have proved to be effective in the practical management of high-risk situations, stating a coherent plan of work carried out in an appropriate and safe manner. The devised statement outlines the model plan of work to be adhered to. Toolbox talks are given, covering tasks to be carried out, personnel involved, identifying the work areas, risks, exclusion zones, and general procedures. Checks for warning signs are conducted, checks for loose materials, for anything anchoring the load, and to ensure an appropriate center of gravity. Further checks are done, ensuring the load is secured, strapped down, or fastened where necessary, and instructions to ensure before setting off, the boom is to be telescoped in as far as possible, and to increase stability, the load be lowered as close to the ground as possible. Should the steps highlighted within the method statement have been carried out thoroughly, in turn addressing the guidance issues highlighted, the death of Mr. French may very well have been avoided.
Health and safety. Yeah.